business, but we're all in this. It takes each one of us, so your help would be a plus. Traveling, shopping, ordering a panini, well, you can count on me and see. Businesses are doing their part. We're learning how we can all outsmart a stupid disease that spreads communicably. We're all tired of living antisocially. Keep your distance, wash your hands. It takes a face covering, as we're all discovering. We're all in this together like a potpourri. Well, you can count on me and see. Oh, you can count on me and see. Visit countonmenc.org.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. This webinar is being recorded. It will be available on our partners.visitnc.com site under the COVID-19 resources section. We'll have it up this afternoon. Remember today, if you have any questions, please ask questions in the questions tab on the GoToWebinar screen on the right-hand side of your computer. And if you're calling in, questions can be emailed to guy.gaster@visitnc.com. We'll answer those questions at the end of the program after everyone has presented. Really thrilled about the program we have today. Great panel. We're going to talk about what's happening on the Hill, and we're going to talk about what's happening on Jones Street as well. Of course, I'm here. We have Eric Hanson, who's with the U.S. Travel Association, Kara Weishauer with NC Travel and Tourism Coalition, and Jason Joyner with the NC Travel Industry Association. These guys are all really connected. And they can tell us exactly what's happening and what we've got coming out to look forward to. And there's a lot of news on that front, so I think our timing for this presentation is really, really good. Okay, I'm going to start off. Of course, I'm Whit Tuttle, Director of Visit NC. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. I'm going to talk a little about these weekly traveler mindset research we've been doing. We've talked about that a lot, but we keep doing the research every week. And looking into where traveler perceptions are. What we've before I get into that, though, I wanted to start with a slide on tourism funding. I know many of you are excited about our recovery program. You heard our jingle at the start there. We have a lot more coming out with Count on Me NC. I'll talk about that a little later. We're also working on a partner stimulus plan that would help each individual local tourism office in all 100 counties to join into our co-op advertising program. We're trying to work out the details of that, as well as the $1.5 million grant that was put into the funding that we'll do in conjunction with the NCTIA. We're excited about all those. There are lots of restrictions that come with spending federal and state dollars, so we're making sure we get the program set up so that it follows all the guidelines and we can make it as simple as possible. We'll have more news on that coming out soon. When it comes to traveler mindset, I'm going to talk a little today about the new things we're seeing. Many of the statistics we're seeing are about the same. We saw a little bit of positivity coming back in traveler mindset overall, but I think there were some real interesting things we saw this week that we hadn't seen before. First one was the type of lodgings people would use and what they consider safe. I think this is really interesting. We've heard a lot of people talk about, oh, everybody wants to get in a camper. Everybody, they're just staying in vacation rentals. But the thing I thought was fascinating is our research showed that what people thought was the safest was not exactly what they were going to do. So the safest things they thought were 5-star luxury hotels or full service hotels, and then campgrounds and RVs, and then vacation home rentals, basically in that order. The interesting thing, though, is they didn't say they were going to stay in that. They were staying in the full service lodgings first, not the 5 stars, 5-star second, and then the vacation home and rentals. Budget hotels were even there, even though that is the lowest among the safe. So people are still economically looking at these things, and they're taking into account safety, but also the economy. And so what I thought was really fascinating is people think our campgrounds and RVs, well, they're probably really safe, but there's still a large portion of our travel audience that says, but I'm not doing that. I'm not staying there. I'm staying in a hotel. And so I think that's interesting as we go forward. Another thing I think is really important to talk about is face masks. People are more and more believing in face masks and that people should wear face masks. That's gone up to 80%, so that's 8 out of 10 basically agree or strongly agree that you should wear a face mask in public. So I think that's a really good sign, and it's going to help us. And when it comes to destinations like North Carolina, where face masks are required, that's becoming even more positive, and that's 70% of the people say they feel very happy or happy about visiting destinations that require face masks. So having those face masks is very important in everything we do. The other fascinating thing that's going on with the traveler mindset is how this is impacting the psychology of people and their ability to even enjoy travel when they do travel. And I think this is a real concern for us. Right now, we had 60% of the people saying even if they traveled for leisure right now, they really wouldn't fully enjoy it. That they can't forget about this thing. It's a constant issue for them. And the next slide, I think it shows a lot of people have lost interest in travel, and these numbers keep growing. So we really don't want to see that. There's this sense of some people have given up, and so we need to do everything we can to fight those issues that we see going on with traveler mindset. And so I think those are important. And then you always say, hey, it's not something worth losing sleep over, or what are the things that keep you up awake at night? Well, for almost half the people in the country, this coronavirus is doing that. It's causing people even to frequently or sometimes lose sleep or not be able to sleep. That's really how bad it is. So we've got a lot that we're going up against with this. We need to get it under control. I think our safety message is very important, and we all need to chip in and continue to do that safety message as part of the Count on Me NC program. You guys saw the Count on Me NC jingle at the beginning. We're encouraged by the research, but we really need to show this stronger commitment. Really encouraged that people are doing the mask. That's very important. We've been really successful since we started. We've had more than 13,000 individual training certificates issued, more than 110,000 visitors to the website for Count on Me NC. We're really excited, and we are just now getting to roll out a lot of these assets that we're putting out in the market. So you guys should be seeing them either outdoor or digitally or on TV, because come August, we're going to hit every single market with this message. We're really excited to help you guys get the message out as well and do everything we can to get you engaged in this program. And to do that, we've started a toolkit, which many of you will get emails today, and it's basically going to have all the resources from the Count on Me NC campaign, so you can pull them down, incorporate them in all of your advertising as well. We've kept these free for everybody to use, so everybody can contribute as well. It's going to be on our partners.visitnc page, and it'll be a password protected toolkit because we have all the assets there. But you'll get that email today. And if we can do anything else, please let us know. Dana Grimstead is going to oversee this, but we're really happy with where the campaign is going and what's happening with it. All right, so that was my quick update. Now, I really wanted to get to our panelists today because we've got a great group to talk about some really important things that are going on here today. So first up, we have Eric Hanson. Eric's with the U.S. Travel Association. He does a great job working for them. And as everyone knows, U.S. Travel is our main lobbying group in DC. They do an amazing job helping out with federal government, and federal government has been tremendously important with this. So I'll leave it to you, Eric.
Thanks so much, Whit. And thanks to all of you for inviting me here today and for regular convening these calls and for engaging in advocacy. It's so important for what's happening now, not only in Washington, but in the state as well. So we can't thank you enough for all your help and support. We wanted to quickly go over not only how we're focused in continuing U.S. Travel's mission during this crisis, but also what's happening on the economic front, the data that we're seeing, how we're using that data to advocate in Washington and what we're asking for to support the industry's economic recovery. And then lastly, we wanted to provide an update on what's happening with the HEALS Act, which was just unveiled a little earlier this week and we'll start the negotiations between first the Republican side of the Senate and the Democrats, and then ultimately the House side as well. So we've got a long way to go on this, but there are a lot of good updates there. So first, just to set the table on some of the data that you all know, on the next slide, here is the economic picture for what the travel industry looked like in 2019. Over $1.1 trillion were spent by travelers. That generated 2.6 trillion in economic activity and supported 15 million American jobs. Travel is one of the top 10 industries in terms of employment in 49 states in the District of Columbia. Travel spending supported $1,400 in tax benefits for each family, and 83% of all businesses that are in the travel industry are small businesses. So more than anything, travel is really helping our small businesses throughout the country provide a living for not only their owners, but their employees as well. But we've fallen a long way. The impact of this virus, of this pandemic, has really impacted travel more than any other industry. And if you look at some of the worst crises that the industry has ever faced, like 9/11, when you compare the economic impacts just from the few short months that we've been going through this, they're already 10 times worse than the economic impacts that we saw after 9/11. The industry is on track this year to lose $500 billion in spending, which would wipe out $1.2 trillion in economic activity. That's almost half of the economic activity that the travel industry generated in 2019. So again, that's 10 times worse than 9/11, but the most devastating aspect of this pandemic has been the job loss. More than 8 million travel industry employees have lost their jobs just since March. That's 50% unemployment in the travel industry. Now, if you go back to the Great Depression, at the height of it, unemployment was at 25% nationally. So in the travel industry, we're twice the unemployment rate that we experienced in the Great Depression. So it's clear that while the rest of the economy is barreling towards a recession, the travel industry itself is actually in a depression. And we're seeing economic recovery projections extending outwards of 4 to 5 years, depending on how bad things get. So we've got a long way to go, and we are going to need help and support, not only from our state and local governments, but really from Congress as well. And that brings us to our priorities for this next phase of coronavirus relief legislation that Congress is considering now. So we wanted to go over the top 5 things that the travel industry is advocating for, and then we'll provide an update of what was in the most recent draft of the legislation. So first, it's clear that the industry is going to need continued economic relief. We're going to have extended periods of low demand where people just aren't traveling, either because of concerns about the health and safety of travel, or because of government required quarantines, shutdowns, or shelter-in-place orders. So because of all those things, there is going to be a need for continued relief, not only for employees and their families, but for businesses to keep the lights on. And what the travel industry is asking for is continued relief for small, mid-sized, and large businesses. And we've really been focused on the Paycheck Protection Program. One thing we need to do is extend the eligibility of the Paycheck Protection Program to nonprofits and quasi-governmental destination marketing organizations. In every disaster, DMOs have led the economic recovery following 9/11, hurricanes, SARS, H1N1. It's always been the DMOs that have sent public health and safety messages, but have also sent the message that businesses and communities have safely reopened. And that has really kickstarted the travel industry's recovery, again, after every crisis. So we need them not only to retain their employees, but to be able to meet basic expenses so that they're positioned to help the travel industry out of this. We've also asked for the PPP to be extended through the end of the year and to provide opportunities for second loans for the most severely impacted businesses. And then in the second phase, that's where we're really looking to help to jumpstart the recovery. So our second ask is for the federal government to provide grants to state, local governments, and destination marketing organizations to promote safe and healthy travel practices, but also to conduct traditional tourism marketing, to let Americans know that there are regions of the country that have safely reopened for business, and to inspire confidence that Americans can travel safely and to provide information about how to do that. We've asked for $10 billion in grants, which would cover DMO budgets in our estimate for about 2 years. We're going to ask for that funding to be spread over a 4-year period of time to cover lost revenue. And we're going to ask for it in kind of 2 tranches. One would be $5 billion through state and local relief funding. As you all know, the $15 million that North Carolina received was out of that pot of funding. We're going to ask for a specific set aside of $5 billion and any future funding for state and local governments to be set aside for travel promotion. And then a second tranche of funding through the Economic Development Administration on a competitive needs-based grant program that EDA would distribute through its regional offices, where DMOs could apply directly to EDA to receive a grant for travel promotion. So that's a $10 billion ask split over 2 pots of funding, and something that's going to be a big priority for the travel industry. Third, if businesses are going to reopen, they have to have the certainty that they'll be protected from frivolous or aggressive lawsuits. There are so many businesses that have been struggling for months that simply don't have the revenue they need to keep, again, the lights on, to pay basic bills, to keep their employees on payroll. And even one frivolous lawsuit for coronavirus exposure could really sink a business. So liability protections are going to be critical for reopening the economy. What we're asking for is not a broad liability and legal reform. We're simply asking for a limited safe harbor for businesses that follow applicable health and safety guidelines that are set out by federal, state, or local government. We're asking for those protections to be temporary, just through the period of this pandemic, and really no longer. And we're asking for those to be in place immediately for any pending litigation, but also any future litigation that comes through this crisis. Priority number 4 on the next slide is to really stimulate travel. Once businesses have what they need to reopen, once we're starting to encourage safe and healthy travel, we're also going to need to provide financial incentives to spur incremental travel beyond what would take place organically in this really devastated economy. So we are proposing a travel tax credit worth up to $4,000 per family. It's a refundable tax credit that Americans could use to take a trip of more than 50 miles from home, and any expense they incur through that trip over $50 could be used as a refundable tax credit on their return for that year. We're asking for that to be in place for 2 years, really to start to prime the pump and get the engine going for the travel industry's economic recovery. We've also asked for Congress to restore deductibility for business meals and entertainment. In the last tax reform package, the deduction for food was limited to 50%, and the entertainment tax deduction was completely eliminated. So we're asking for both to be brought back at 100% deductibility over a limited period of time, and we'll continue to advocate for that as well. Fifth, we're asking for funding for research, development, production, and distribution of more rapid COVID-19 testing. It's clear that in every phase of a reopening and recovery, testing is going to be a critical element. So continued federal leadership on testing, not only in research, but in distribution, coordinating the states, providing funding for contact tracing is going to be essential. And really what we need is the federal government to step forward and play a leadership role in coordinating efforts among the states and local governments. And that'll be particularly important for travel when we need people to travel among the states. We can't have a patchwork of testing and contact tracing systems. So testing is really going to be a key element of our recovery. And then lastly, we're asking for emergency assistance for U.S. airports of $13 billion to be provided in additional funds to help them cover revenue losses. That's going to be important for making sure that when air travel can restart, that they have the funding they need for operations. So it's a pretty big list of asks, but we've communicated to Congress that if these things were enacted, our economists forecast that it would generate an additional $71 billion in travel spending, another $163 billion in economic output, $11 billion in federal, state, and local taxes, and restore 800,000 jobs faster than would otherwise happen if we just left the travel industry go on its own and recover on its own. So we can bring back almost 1 million jobs if Congress decides to act and act quickly. So when the HEALS Act was released this week, there were a lot of positive things in that legislation. A couple things that were missing that we still got to work on. But I want to highlight a couple of those. The most important is that the Paycheck Protection Program was extended through the end of the year. That's a big win for the travel industry when we need continued relief. And I know importantly for a lot of folks on the webinar today, we were also able to get expanded eligibility for destination marketing organizations with 300 employees or less. And so that eligibility actually extends not only to any category of 501c nonprofit, so it could be a 501c6, a 501c4 nonprofit, but also to quasi-governmental destination marketing organizations, or those that are classified as a political instrumentality or a subdivision of a state or local government. So that's a really broad provision. We've got to fight to keep that in there. So one of our requests today is that you reach out to your senators and ask them to support that provision to keep it in the HEALS Act. It's going to be incredibly important for that to happen. Congress also, or the Senate Republicans also proposed to extend the Paycheck Protection Program to allow for a second loan. And that's just available for businesses with 300 employees or less, or 501c nonprofits or veterans groups with 300 employees or less. And there's another qualification this time around. You have to have at least 50% revenue decline in the first or second quarter of this year compared to the first or second quarter of last year. Now that's designed to make sure that the Paycheck Protection Program is focused on those businesses that are really suffering and not providing loans and loan forgiveness to companies that don't really need it as much. So I would expect that 50% revenue decline number will adjust some, but really I think that's going to be the real intent of this program this time around. And then lastly, there is a new long-term recovery loan program that's available for businesses with 500 employees or less, where they can get a 20-year loan at a 1% interest rate to help cover operating costs between now and a number of years into the future. And that's to help stabilize their operations and provide access to capital at the lowest cost possible. So that's we see as a positive development as well. On the tax front, the first draft that was released did provide 100% deductibility for business meals. Unfortunately, the travel tax credit was not included in this draft, but we do hear, or we have heard a number of times, that it's still under consideration. It's actually something that the White House is still pushing for. So we could see some progress on that. But there was additional tax benefits as well, including the employee retention tax credit, which was expanded in the HEALS Act, and tax credits for cleaning and sanitation services that businesses are now really saddled with extra costs when they're reopening. So there are tax credits available for that. On the appropriations front, there was additional flexibility for CRF funding, which would allow states and localities to use up to 25% of the funding that was provided in the CARES Act to cover revenue losses. And that could include revenue losses from reduced lodging taxes. And that additional flexibility is provided if the state spends 25% of its CRF fund to provide it downstream to smaller governments. They want to make sure that the money does flow to some of the small municipalities and counties. So that requirement is in there. What comes with it is the added benefit of flexibility. But no additional funding was provided for state and local governments, at least in this first proposal from Senate Republicans. But I would expect that when the negotiations start in earnest with the House, I think we'll see the state and local relief number come up, particularly because the liability protections that were included in Senator McConnell's bill were so broad. And that's going to be a real trading point between Democrats and Republicans, where I think we'll see some more limited liability protections that was released earlier this week, and as part of a trade-off for more funding for state and local governments, and hopefully additional flexibility. So what our job is going to be over the next week, again, is to fight to keep that Paycheck Protection Program stability in there for destination marketing organizations. We've got to fight for additional $10 billion in grants for travel promotion through the CRF and through the Economic Development Administration. That's going to be really critical. There was a bill just introduced called the STEP Act, which authorized $10 billion in grants. So we'll provide some grassroots information on how to engage in that. That's a great way to show political support for that ask. So we got to get that included in the bill. And then lastly, we're going to continue to fight for expanded state and local flexibility and additional relief funding that could be used for travel promotion. So I know we'll have questions at some point, but again, I want to thank all of you for your grassroots engagement, which has really made a difference on the DMO front, and we know it'll make a difference on our other priorities as well.
Thanks a lot, Eric. That's great information, and it's great to see that U.S. Travel's in there fighting for all of us every step of the way. We really appreciate that. I know plenty of people have questions for Eric. Just type them into the questions tab, and then we're going to get back to Eric and bring him back right after we talk a little about what's going on at the state level. I think that was a great overview of the federal benefits and what's happening there in those packages. We also have a lot going on at the state level with our North Carolina General Assembly, and we've got two real experts to talk about it. Kara Weishauer with the Travel and Tourism Coalition, Jason Joyner with the NCTIA and their lobbying group. If you don't know these two people, you really should, because they're in there every day that the General Assembly's here, and even when they're not, fighting for the interests of the tourism industry, and we wouldn't be able to survive without them. So they're going to tag team this. So welcome, Kara and Jason.
Hey, thank you, Whit.
Sure.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and kick it off and ask Kara to chime in with me as we go through it, and then she's going to wrap up with some other pieces. As Eric just highlighted, the Fed sent down an initial CARES package that you guys have seen and Whit kind of covered in the way that has thus far been appropriated out. The total of $20 million in talking to legislators when we had those conversations. They trust us because of the numbers. They understand the size and the scope, the impact of our industry on the economy. And I think the fact that very early on you saw Vince Chelina, NCRLA, WIT in front of those early COVID committees, which was a priority for Kara and I think all the groups involved, laid the foundation for good appropriations in the last two packages. The total of $20 million, House Bill 1023, that just the most recent money that Whit was talking about, was the second round. That time gap in between was the General Assembly waiting to see what sort of flexibility and/or future funding they may see from the Fed. And coming back with that second package, I was happy to see the increase, primarily because it meant they continue to understand the numbers and they continue to understand the impact. As we move forward and with the HEALS package and other things that Eric discussed, it's going to be important to have those same conversations that we were having and you guys were leading with your community members back in March again, to continue that narrative. The other important piece is going to be when we talk about greater flexibility for us, as Eric said, we're also going to, in a lot of ways, receive greater flexibility for the program as a whole. And while that is great for a lot of people who currently have been left out or not able to comply, it makes the funding a little bit easier to use. It makes it a little bit easier to use for everybody, for all the purposes. So states having the ability to backfill funds. You can just imagine as you watch the news every night that the lawmakers have a vast amount of priorities. And the more limits that are taken off the money that is sent down, since we are by and large eligible for the funds already, it's opening up eligibility to others and possibly decreasing the total appropriation. I'm going to let Kara, if you just want to speak to some of the other things.
Great, thank you, Jason. Yeah, I agree with everything Jason said. This additional flexibility that could come from Congress is crucial for the state, local government priorities. The state is in a pretty good spot this year from a budget perspective. They've done a nice job with the rainy day fund and saving additional. So we're not going to see those huge budget holes this year, but we do need to play this out. And so I think to the extent some of this CARES Act flexibility can help the state weather the storm and keep priorities in place, that's going to be crucial for us. I did want to go back. So the legislative session ended at the end of June. They are slated to come back on September 2nd. The adjournment resolution that was passed really limits what they can do when they come back on September 2nd to COVID-related items. It's pretty narrow. It won't be open to a bunch of other legislative items. The governor could call them back earlier. They could call them back, you know, in mid-August possibly, if there's additional flexibility from this HEALS Act to allow for additional funding. So that remains to be seen. But I want to go back to what happened at the legislative session that ended at the end of June. In addition to these amazing tourism-related pots of money, the $15 million and the $1.5 million for grant funding for the state that's directly for tourism, we did have some other policies that were really helpful for the industry, and I want to highlight those for you now. There was a bill, it's Senate Bill 212, and it had several education items in there as schools need to reopen in a different capacity, obviously online and potentially earlier. One of the things that the travel industry worked with legislative leaders on was to provide a permanent definition for what a year-round school qualifies for. This is helpful for the tourism industry. Some local school districts have taken the year-round definition. It was vague, and it allowed them to open school earlier than that last week of August. And as you all know from around the state, if we start eroding those summer weeks in August, that's really harmful for our tourism industry from a tax perspective and from jobs and business. So we are pleased that there's a now permanent definition of what a year-round school is. And so in the years moving forward, that should help the industry protect those summer weeks and months from that erosion. So that's Senate Bill 212, that was passed into law and signed. Another bill, just to piggyback off of what Eric talked about on the federal level in needing some limited business liability from COVID-related cases so that we can reopen the economy. The state was forward thinking. It passed overwhelmingly bipartisan support. It was House Bill 118, and that's the COVID liability safe harbor. And that was a bill that provides businesses, government agencies, and others limited liability immunity from lawsuits based on the transmission of COVID-19. So we are pleased, the Travel and Tourism Coalition was pleased to support that legislation along with other business groups, and it is now law, which is really helpful as businesses try to reopen, that they're, as they're dealing with the onslaught of losses financially, that they're not also concerned in the wake of potential lawsuits. So we're very pleased that that was passed as well. We're going to keep all working on your behalf as they come back in September 2nd, and then through the election cycle into the new year. I know this is our, I hate using the word the new normal. This feels like this is the next normal for us. That we're going to be living with this pandemic, and we need to learn how to live in and around it. And I think what Eric and Jason outlined in terms of federal and state support for the industry is a wonderful first step, and we look forward to all working together to ensure that we continue to move forward. So thank you.
All right, thanks guys. We'll bring Eric back in here. I have to excuse me, I had air conditioning work done this morning and my fire alarm keeps going off in my house. So you may hear some unusual noises. So we'll start off with questions for Eric. Eric, we had somebody ask if you guys have templates or something that they could use to speak with their legislators.
We do. I believe we sent out a couple templates last night for outreach to the Senate. And Whit, if it's okay, what I can do is email those to you and you can distribute those to the group.
Yeah, fantastic. We can put them up on the partner site.
Perfect.
That'd be great. We had a question here. Kara mentioned grant funding for the state. Is that something DMOs can apply for? And if so, how?
So there is grant funding, and I think, Whit, as you suggested in your comments earlier, that you all are working through a process and criteria of how to apply for some of that grant funding. that's on the state level. And then certainly Eric mentioned that there's grant funding in place on the federal level as well to take advantage of. So I might turn it over to Eric for any federal grant funding opportunities.
Right now, one of the pots of funding that a lot of DMOs are competing for is through EDA. There was $1.5 billion provided in the CARES Act for EDA. One of the challenges is that there's not currently eligibility for EDA grant revenue to be used to purchase advertisements. You can do a lot of things like research, fund materials, even do some of the development of the creative. But in terms of actually purchasing advertisements, EDA has told us that there's not existing eligibility. So one thing we're going to try to fix in this next bill will be to provide for that expanded eligibility. But there is an opportunity to apply for EDA grants, which would be really competitive, but to fund some of the things that lead up to travel marketing and promotion.
Okay, and then we had a question for Jason and Kara. Do you think there will be cuts to the state budget this year, and if so, how severe? Jason, you want to take that?
No, I don't think anyone wants to take that question. But yeah, so the last number that I had heard, we were well over $4 billion. The rainy day fund, the savings that the state has had is being helpful. I think in the long run, you're going to see, yes, we're going to see cuts. We've already started to see some scaling back. You're going to see more cuts. How severe those are, I think, is what everyone's question is right now, and I don't think we know yet.
Yeah, and Jason hit the nail on the head. I think in terms of where we are for this fiscal year, I do think North Carolina is better positioned than many states, given the savings that has occurred. And in many ways, if y'all will recall, the state didn't actually enact a new budget this year, which would have included a lot of additional spending. And so while that was unfortunate for many reasons, actually it's ended up saving the state some dollars that allowed for it to weather this storm. Obviously unintended, but we'll take every win we can get at this point. Interestingly, on a separate issue, but it's a good budget indicator, the state went ahead and was able to fully fund the Medicaid rebates this year in the state, meaning, paying for those additional people that need to be on Medicaid. So there weren't cuts to Medicaid, and that's sort of a canary in the coal mine, situation. If they can fund Medicaid, they're probably in a fine place for this fiscal year. But again, to Jason's point, depending on how long and severe this pandemic and economic crisis goes on, it's those out years, it's the following 2 or 3 fiscal years that we need to keep an eye on in terms of, once our reserves are drained, then where do we go? And then that's probably when the cuts start. So we're fine today, but it's next year we have to watch out for.
Super, thanks guys, that's a great point. Another question for Eric. Eric, you had mentioned the CRF funding can be used to recover occupancy tax losses. How could a DMO access that?
So if the HEALS Act was enacted, it would apply that flexibility retroactively. And it would allow a state or locality to use up to 25% of its funds to cover lost revenue. So you would have to go to your state or local government, and they would have to agree to use part of that 25% allocation to cover lost lodging taxes and to provide that revenue to you all through the CRF funding. So again, that's going to be a play that you all would have to make with the state or local government if the HEALS Act were enacted, but that's the provision as it currently exists today.
So that's going to require the HEALS Act to be passed, for one thing, and then secondly, for the state to be able to say, well, a piece of that money that we got from the federal government, we're going to be able to distribute across. So that's kind of probably a wait and see, I guess, for a lot of our partners.
It is, and I would imagine that's going to be a really, really competitive pot of funding. There are so many tax revenue categories that have just absolutely declined, that fund a lot of important things. So it would, I think, be a big lift, but it's possible to convince the state or local government to use part of their allocation to cover lost lodging taxes.
Yeah, that's going to be a challenge for everybody. There are a lot of needs for sure. Somebody had asked too what the name of the new act was. It's the HEALS Act, H-E-A-L-S Act, and I guess that's just the name. That's sort of the second round versus the first round was the CARES Act. Eric? Right?
That's correct. It's an acronym. I haven't memorized the acronym yet, but so it's the McConnell CARES Act, McConnell HEALS Act. He's running for re-election. You can remember it by calling it the Tar Heels Act. There
we go. I like that. It's a good way to do it. All right. We had another question about, well, this one's for me. Is there, how can you get a hold of those resources for the Count on Me campaign? We will send out emails to all our DMO partners, and that toolkit will be on the partners page at partners.visitnc.com. All right. One other question about the state budget. Do you think we will have a state budget this year? And if so, when?
Jason, since you've been—
the first one, if you want to take the second part of the question.
Sure. So even though we didn't pass a new state budget, we do have a state budget in place. It's the previous fiscal year's budget. It just, because they didn't pass a new one, there was a law passed in 2016 or 2018 that, you know, we're not like the federal government. If we don't pass a new budget, we don't have furloughs and government doesn't stop running. Now it just reverts back to the previous fiscal year's budget. That does mean that only recurring dollars are currently in place. So any non-recurring dollars that were 1 year at a time type funding, those have not moved forward. So we do have a budget this year, technically, in that sense. And I'll turn it over to Jason, but I don't foresee them passing any sort of new or updated budget, especially when they come back for just a short amount of time in early September before they head back to work on campaigns and election. You know, over the course of the long session earlier in the summer, they did pass mini budgets. So they were able to fund certain education components of the budget, healthcare components. So I get the sense, in talking to legislators, they've already done what they think they need to do in terms of additional funds for a budget this year.
Yeah, I completely agree with Carol there. And I think if you look at the way each of these mini budgets have been written, there's a lot of intentionality and referencing and being sure to do it in this manner. So I feel like we're seeing what we're going to see, at least for the rest of this year.
And as that relates to Visit NC, of course, last year when the budget just continued, that meant we had our core funding, but we lost potentially, we were on the line to receive $1 million in non-recurring funds that would have helped us. And we also lost a $500,000 in non-recurring funds that we had received the year before. So if this continues again, we will essentially have a flat budget because we didn't have any of those non-recurring funds this past year. And so if they just continue with the recurring funds, then we'll be at an even level with last year, which I'll take at this point, yeah. Eric, we had one other question for you. Will the PPP cover full payroll and benefits for 8 weeks or just 60%?
So it'll cover full payroll and benefits up to 60% of the forgivable amount. So what you'll do is you'll calculate the maximum loan amount by taking 2.5 times your average monthly payroll over 2019, or you can do it from the time you apply for a loan back 12 months. You'll get that amount, and then you can have that amount forgiven up to 60% of it for the payroll cost that you spend over an 8-week period. So they actually allow you to pick that period though. The minimum is 8 weeks from the time you get the loan all the way to December 31st of this year. So you can kind of pick your covered period for when you would get the loan forgiveness. But that will be forgiven at 60% for the payroll cost and then 40% for whatever you spend during the period on eligible expenses.
That's great. And another question, is there a template that could be shared or talking points that could be shared with DMOs for contacting our senators? And I believe, Eric, you guys have that on your website.
We do, and we'll send it to you right after this call as well. I think our latest round of outreach is going out this morning. We'll send that to you.
Sounds great. One more question. The family credit, would that include any and all expenses in a quote unquote family vacation?
Yeah, as we drafted the proposal, it would include meals, transportation, lodging, entertainment. So it's a pretty wide category of expenses as we've drafted it. And I think as Senators Cortez Masto and Kramer are working on a bill now, I think they would maintain that broad eligibility. Some of the specific expenses would probably be figured out when the IRS issues regulations, if this were enacted, but we would try to cover as much as we could in the tax credit.
That sounds great. And then one last question. So one of the big issues, I think, with a lot of this funding is that it had to be spent by December 30th for the CARES Act funds. Now, are there measures in the HEALS Act that would extend that? Because what we've heard from a lot of partners is they're still not sure they're going to be doing enough advertising in the fall and winter, that it may be spring when they can really get the most benefit out of it.
Great question. The HEALS Act extends the eligibility period through the end of next year, through the end of 2021. So if that were passed today, that extended flexibility would be there. You would be allowed to spend some of the funding next year. So I think whether it's a new pot of funding that they provide this time around, or whether they include additional flexibility for the last round of funding, I think it's likely that there will be additional funds available to spend next year.
Fantastic. That'll be very beneficial. Well, Eric, Kara, Jason, really appreciate all you guys are doing for us all year round, especially in times like these. Thanks for being here. We look forward to talking to you guys again, and keep up the good fight for us. Thanks a lot, everybody. We appreciate having you. Just so everybody knows, next week we'll talk a little more about the Count on Me NC Toolkit in our presentation, our webinar at 10, and a lot of things that are going to go on with that campaign. We look forward to seeing you guys then. Thanks a lot.
We're open for business, but we're all in this. It takes each one of us, so your help would be a plus. Traveling, shopping, ordering a panini, well, you can count on me and see. Businesses are doing their part. We're learning how we can all outsmart a stupid disease that spreads communicably. We're all tired of living antisocially. Keep your distance, wash your hands. It takes a face covering, as we're all discovering. We're all in this together like a potpourri. Well, you can count on me and see. Oh, you can count on me and see. Visit countonmenc.org.